Good morning, friends. I just wanted to be able to chat a little bit about some conversations that we were having on the radio this morning. Sometimes if you just don't get enough time, you just have to go off and try to explain things a little bit more so that maybe they might be more clearly understood or that I can clarify my position. Commonly, for those of you that listen to KIDOAM.com with Kevin Miller, he will have Alan L. Morton, attorney at law, on, and it's good to hear his voice. It's nice to be able to hear a perspective. I just wish at some point that we would probably come together and agree more because of the fact that he is an attorney and we actually pay people like him to represent us. And so if we disagree, then the way that we would like to get represented becomes challenging, to say the least. In one of his statements, he basically said, and I have to say in upfront, I really appreciate his pragmatism. I really appreciate his sensitivity to a lot of the issues. It helps me to understand that he probably doesn't view us as extreme as maybe he once did, as he starts seeing several abuses happen. And so he takes a much more pragmatic view, and I take much more of an ideological view. And the first example of that is when he says that the federal government can, creates laws that restrict firearms for particular reasons. Where I live, in my mind, as I believe that our founders did, was if we're a constitutional republic, the federal government can't make law. Period. I don't care if you're a pragmatist. I don't care if whatever you are. If the Constitution was created that gave few and defined powers to the federal government and all were left to the states and the people, you can't have both. If the federal government makes laws to be able to ban freedom of speech, to ban your freedom of religion, to ban the press, and to ban your ability to be able to meet and redress grievances, or restrict your gun rights, it is a usurpation of the law and therefore no law at all. And the states should actually defend the citizens from the usurpation of the federal government. And so should the attorneys if they are truly interested in the Constitution, which is a completely different dialogue altogether. He also stated that there really wasn't he alluded to the fact that there was, that the people out at the Bundy Ranch were guilty or charged with conspiracy or co-conspiracy. And the question I have is why he hasn't mentioned the fact that the government is actually the conspiracy. And I think he also alluded to the fact, or stated quite frankly, that there actually was no conspiracy. In reality, I disagree wholeheartedly, and anybody that looks at the facts can see it very clearly, especially from my position. One of them is why the media never talks about Uranium One and the connection to the Clinton Foundation and the abolition of private property through Agenda 21, the trade agreements, the United Nations control over our federal lands, our state lands, and about how all the regulations are actually written by a supranational governing authority much higher than the United States. The other thing, too, to consider is that the BLM, there's this big understanding that that these states, they arm themselves, and it was a what did they call it? An armed occupation. I mean, let's just escalate our terms, shall we? I mean, the English language is not meant to be able to be determined by our government and for us to be able to submit to. The English language and the rule of law were created by the people so that we understood how to, number one, speak to each other, but how the laws applied to us and how the laws applied to government. By giving government the authority to be able to define what our English language is, it puts us in a position of being inferior, which is contrary to really what our founders had in mind for our government. Consequently, we could actually argue the fact that the BLM actually does not own land. The BLM were land managers. And in the original charter, they never had the authority to be able to be armed. Well, now what we have is every federal agency now, with the billions of rounds of hollow point bullets, now has become a law enforcement agency. Clearly undelegated authority, clearly to be able to overrun the states. So when you tell me that there's no conspiracy, I highly disagree. And you could say, to the best of your knowledge, you don't believe that there's a conspiracy, and you might have to talk to Tom Munns to find out, or somebody else, for example, many of my friends on Facebook. But to say that there's no conspiracy, it really just puts mud on your face. You know, Agenda 21, we all know, is controlled by the United Nations. People look at us like we're conspiracy kooks, but the fact of the matter is that it does exist. And every piece of law that is written dealing with green energy and sustainability and all of those code words are all Agenda 21 to be able to enslave us. And I actually call it communism through environmentalism. And so when we talk about these, he actually said, well, you know, you have the right to be able to take a firearm or you have a right to challenge your federal government, you know, and, you know, exercise your, you know, he basically made it sound like constitutionally you could be arrested, but your right wasn't protected. In other words, he would say, well, you know, you could go in and you could arm yourselves at the BLM and challenge the feds. And that's your constitutional right. But I think it was a funny play on words because our rights existed before government was created. As long as we're not harming anyone and we're not threatening anyone, there's no crime that's been committed. So for them to be able to say it was an armed occupation and we were doing all of this, I'm not saying that what they did was absolutely correct in every instance. I'm still going through the facts myself. There was a few questions that I actually had, and whether I would actually be in that situation. But at some point, the American people are going to have to stand up, and the government is intentionally antagonizing its people. The federal government is agitating the public, the people of the states and the states themselves as the states cower. And then you have the establishment in any particular state that is actually trying to oppress the people too. So you're further complicating and compressing the issue, forcing the people to be able to fight back. And it's almost as if the legislatures, the state legislatures, and the federal government are in cahoots with one another because of the fact that they're working toward that end. I mean, it's clear that they're working towards the abolition of private property. It's clear that they intend on restricting our gun rights. It's clear that they're restricting your freedom of the press by telling me I can't, you know, record... I can't take my recorder into a public hearing and post it publicly on Facebook. So every instance, every protection that was afforded to us by law that government was created to do is doing the exact opposite. And somehow people are scrutinizing a few disgruntled patriots for carrying firearms. And clearly those that actually say that have no understanding of law. They have no understanding of history. They have no understanding of our founding principles. And if they do, they're cowering in the corner, just trying to be pragmatic to get by, saying, well, if you're going to do this, you're going to suffer consequences. It's like if we don't step up and we try to reverse what's happening, we're going to end up suffering the consequences anyway. So if you're going to back the citizens into a corner, what the hell difference does it make if we fight now or we fight later? If we begin to fight now by educating people and arming them with the tools they need and the education they need, and we can unify our worldview, which is a huge problem. The biggest reason why we can't unify is the fact that so many people believe so many different things that nobody's unified in anything. Anyway, so those are just some of my thoughts. It appears to me that Alan L. Morton must believe that we're in a different form of government. Maybe we should ask him. I believe that we might be in a corporatist statutory democracy. Maybe not. But the idea that people would get arrested 2 years after something actually happened, it's clear they're trying to make an example of these guys. And finally, the one thing I wanted to say is, now that we've all identified that there's problems, what the hell are we going to do about it? And what's the state going to do about it? And what are we going to get the states to do about it? Because if we don't, we're going to lose our states in favor of regional governments and the abolition of our state sovereignty, our national sovereignty, and the end of our country. Anyway, positive news today. Love you guys. Bye.